Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our Sankofa moment this evening with the Education, well, it's the Religious Affairs Committee of the Virginia State NAACP and the Education Committee of the Virginia State NAACP. My name is Amy Tillerson Brown, and I chair the Education Committee. And I am here with my esteemed colleague, Reverend Janetta Lee, who heads up the Religious Affairs Committee. And so we are here today to talk about a great in American history right out of Prince Edward County, Virginia, named Barbara Johns. And I want to share a little bit of my screen with you if I can, as we get started with Barbara Johns. Let's see. Here we are. Barbara Rose Johns was the first child of Violet Adele Spencer Johns and Robert Melvin Johns' 5 children. She was born March 6, 1935 in New York City. During the Great Depression, her parents had relocated to their birthplace in Prince Edward County, from Prince Edward County to Harlem, New York, in search of employment. Their daughter was only 14 months old when Violet and Robert Johns moved back to Prince Edward County, since their jobs as domestic workers and handymen didn't help their financial situation much. They briefly managed a small store that was owned by their uncle, Vernon Johns, who the older brother of Robert Johns, in Darlington Heights, which was a part of Prince Edward County. The Johnses were struggling to expand their family, and they took a second trip north to DC in 1942. In that same year, Robert Johns was drafted into the United States Army. Violet Johns was hired by the government. Violet Johns returned to Prince Edward County with Barbara, who was then 7 years old, and her 2 younger siblings, because she was worried about raising her children by herself. The journey from Washington to Farmville was characterized as exciting by Barbara, mainly because it was her first time on the train. And this trip really impressed her because even though she had never seen her father in uniform, she assumed that he must have been halfway as attractive as some of the men that she saw on the train. Barbara Johns kept a journal. And as she kept this journal, she fondly recalled the years that she spent on her grandmother's farm. It was a 175-acre tract of land where her grandmother and her second husband raised pigs, cows, tobaccos, corn, and other crops. Her days were filled with chores, and her days were also filled with reading. In her library, the library of their homes, they had so many books ranging from Washington's Up from Slavery to Richard Wright's Native Son. Anything that could keep their mind occupied, they would read. So Barbara came from a hardworking family. She came from a family of workers. Her uncle, Vernon Johns, was a clergyman, and she had siblings. So this is the backdrop that sets her up for making the change that she made in Prince Edward County as a 16-year-old. You'll see, and let's get into that a little bit. The schools that she was attending were much like so many of the segregated schools all throughout the rural South. These examples of photographs come from Peebles, the Edward Peebles collection at Virginia Commonwealth University. Schools, as in keeping with American apartheid at the time, were very separate and unequal in terms of facilities. And if you see here, you'll see a picture of Peaks Elementary School. Peaks was the name of a Black church in the Prospect District of Prince Edward County. And if you look at that, you can compare it to Prospect Elementary School. That was the white-only school. You can see from first glance, the white-only school was much larger. I want you to keep in mind, however, the population of Prince Edward County was near equal. So it's not like the white school had better facilities because they had more students. That wasn't the case. The white school had better facilities because they were white, and more tax money was used to build the schools for them. Peaks Elementary School was whitewashed, and probably, oh gosh, I'd say that's about a 3-room school right there. And you can see the difference there with Prospect Elementary. If we look at the high schools, and this is where the school that Barbara Rose Johns was attending in 1951, there's Robert Russell Moton High School, and then there's Farmville High School. Robert Russell Moton High School was built in 1939 for a capacity of about 289 students. By 1951, there were over 450 students that were attending Robert Russell Moton High School. And they had to build what were known as tar paper shacks. You'll see them down in this image here, to accommodate the overflow of the Black students that were literally bursting out of the seams of a school that could not accommodate them all. Now, in sheer size, you see the major difference between Robert Russell Moton here and Farmville High School there. Now, that's the outside. What did it look like on the inside? If you look at Robert Russell Moton Auditorium, here it is from about the 1950s. There are no fixed seats, there are folding chairs there. And then you can compare that to the auditorium and gym. You see where Farmville High School had a gym, there was no gym at Moton High School. And the auditorium in Farmville High School had fixed seats, as you see them there, in comparison to the folding chairs. That was the auditorium at Moton High. But it's in this auditorium that Barbara Johns makes her major debut. But before we get to that auditorium, I want to go back to the tar paper shacks. So if we're looking on the inside of a tar paper shack, most of them had a wood stove. And in the summer, it was very, very hot, or in the winters, it was still very, very cold. And this stove was what they used for heat. But you can see that these were proud students. They came to school with jackets and ties on because education was just that important to them despite the facilities. I want to get into what happened the day that Barbara Johns stood up in that auditorium with no fixed seats and galvanized her high school community to action. And it was this action that helped to argue the Brown case of 1954 that ultimately decided in the field of public education, separate but equal has no place. But right now, I want us to hear this story in the words of many of the students who were there. So hopefully this video, I'm going to start at the 4-minute mark, will get us there. Yes. And we're to start at the 4-minute mark. Let me get there. Thought I was already set up. 2 seconds before.
We wanted so much here and had so little. And we had talent.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. And you can see it fine? You can see it also, right? Can you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Abilities here that weren't really being realized. And I thought that was a tragic shame. And that's basically what motivated me to want to see some change take place here.
In 1951, Barbara Johns, then a 16-year-old junior and niece of activist Reverend Vernon Johns, decides to organize a student strike at the Robert Russell Moton High School.
There wasn't any fear. I just felt that this is your moment. Seize it.
Barbara had decided, she and the other student leaders had decided that this is what they were going to do. They were going to get a representative from each grade and have that person be responsible for telling the other students. And she emphasized that we should keep it a secret.
Mr. Jones was the principal.
we had to get him off campus because we knew if Mr. Jones was on campus, there was no way there was going to be a strike. He was a very strong leader and very highly respected man. So we went home and we pretended we were businessmen calling in, telling him that some students were downtown making disturbances and would he please come down and take care of it. When one of us saw him, then that person called the other two and said, well, he's gone. And we all came, and the three of us came back to the campus.
When we got to the assembly, Barbara came in and walked up on the stage. And I remember saying to myself, what is going on? Why is she up there? And she started to talk. And she was talking so forcefully, and she told us about how the conditions were very bad at the school. And, you know, she needed everyone's cooperation, and she realized this was a surprise, but they had to keep it that way so that it wouldn't leak and that only a few people knew about it.
Barbara started out, of course, and then we just talked and told them strike the school.
And it became a cheering session. What do you want to do? We want to strike. When do you want to strike? Today, you know, and all this. So it really was a rallying situation.
I remember sitting in my seat and sort of cowering down because I couldn't believe it, first of all. First reaction I had was fear. I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to us now?
Everyone, a lot of people were scared. Some of Barbara's closest friends were scared to death for her. They said, why did you do that? She says, we have to make a change. And I mean, right now, you know, Barbara was very dynamic, but she wasn't quiet.
The students marched down the street to the superintendent's office.
We come in the office and this poor secretary almost had a heart attack. So she goes, tells Mr. McElwain that these students are here. So we go in his office. He promised he was going to rain down the wrath of God on all of us for what we were doing. And our parents were going to lose their jobs.
He said, you're upstarts. And, you know, you need to go ahead back to school before all your parents are in jail. And this is what frightened us when he said our parents were going to jail. And a member of my family says, how big is the Farmville jail? And that was it. From that point on, there was no stopping.
Initial reaction was to cut off the economic livelihood of folk, and that, of course, was going to bring them in line. And, you know, Mr. Jones, the principal, was fired. Mama was fired, and Daddy was fired.
Our cross was burned in our yard after the school strike, and my parents sent Barbara to Montgomery, Alabama to live with my Uncle Vernon because they were afraid for her life, because they had received threats.
Responding to the crisis, NAACP lawyers come to Farmville to assess the resolve of the community.
It was just like my watching Jackie Robinson and Evansville. It was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. And they came in there and they were really and truly behind us. They were astounded to find that these people who have been dormant and quiet for so long were ready to back their children. Then, of course, Spotswood Robinson spoke up. And he says, if you're really ready to back them, then you have to sign this petition. And that's when we found out how we could separate the wheat from the chaff in the Black community, because some of the Black didn't sign. As you know, my mother and father signed.
The NAACP takes up the students' cause, adding the Farmville case to a series of suits that will take the Russa Moulton Students' Challenge to Jim Crow all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It was the culmination of a 20-year legal campaign. In 1934, the NAACP's chief legal counsel, Charles Hamilton Houston, had realized that the battle against Jim Crow had to be fought in the courts, that only through a change in the constitutional interpretation of civil rights could the separate but equal justification for segregation be brought to an end. With this new strategy, Houston and Thurgood Marshall had aimed squarely at the heart of Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1896 ruling that had made legal segregation possible. On May 17th, 1954, Houston's vision became a reality. In a case known as Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court upheld the Farmville students' claim for better schools. Speaking for the unanimous court, Chief Justice Earl Warren declared, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place."
I think, believe it or not, we had the idealism of American young people about America. And I think that was a very important, compelling and driving force in the way that these Prince Edward Blacks faced the world. That we saw our history as in evolving into the American story in some way.
The best moment was in 1954 when the Supreme Court overturned segregation in schools. That was the best moment. All the rest of it went for that. Even though when we started, we didn't start for that, but that was the best moment.
When I heard about the historic decision, I said, thank God. Thank God. At last, someone has listened to us. And those were my very words. Someone has listened to us. Hopefully, we shall see a change.
So this 16-year-old girl from Darlington Heights, Virginia, whose parents, like so many parents at the time, had gotten caught up in that great migration, moving up north or to urban centers, looking for more money so that they could support their families, but ultimately coming back. Barbara Johns grew up basically on a farm. And so here she is, this little country girl with enough insight and care and knowledge about herself and what she deserved, right? That she was going to stand up and she was going to galvanize an entire community of other teenagers to stand up and strike against the inadequate facilities that they knew they should have had, in which they knew they should have had better. And so it's this case then, and something that that video clip didn't show, but I love to show it because you get to hear some of these student participants and see them, though it's probably 20 years old, but they get to describe what happened in their own words. And I think that that is really, really important. But you can see that Barbara Johns was a strategizer even at 16 years old. So she had started to plan this strike in the fall semester before April when they walked out. Something that also happened in Prince Edward County that probably got her attention, that we know got her attention, was a bus accident. I call it, it was a train wreck, actually. Students in Prince Edward County got hand-me-down buses from the white community, which was the nature of segregation. Well, one of her best friends happened to be on a bus that was trying to cross over the track, Elam's Crossing, on a very cold and rainy March Tuesday. The train that was coming from Roanoke, Virginia to Farmville, Virginia was speeding. And the bus, the hand-me-down bus, was on the tracks and it stalled. And so Mr. John Robinson, who was a very seasoned driver, was trying to coax the bus over the tracks to no avail. The passenger train from Roanoke heading to Farmville took off the back end of the stalled bus, killing 5 Moton students, one of which was a dear friend of Barbara Johns. I don't think it's happenstance that a month later, she wages this strike that she had been planning at least 4 months previous to that. But it is from this case that Dorothy Davis was the first name on this case, possibly because of where it fell in alphabetical order. Prince Edward County was able to get over 100 signatories. They thought, however, in April that they were going on strike for April, early May, that they were going on strike for better facilities. But after Charles Hamilton Houston had done all he had done for the NAACP and fighting segregation before this case, the NAACP was really ready to move towards integration. They felt like we had fought enough equalization suits. 1939, we had gotten the equalization of salaries. All of this under the guidance and leadership of the great Charles Hamilton Houston, who trained Spotswood Robinson, Oliver Hill, and Thurgood Marshall, and prepared them to wage the legal battle necessary to have won the Brown 1 decision. Now, we know that the legacies of Brown still plague us. And even after the heroism of people like Barbara Johns, we still have a long way to go. But I don't think that that should snuff out the activist strategies of teenagers during a time where change just had to come. I'm looking at the time and I think we have about 9 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, I'd really like to entertain them. But Barbara Johns, we know because of the work of many activists, she has a statue now in Richmond, and that went up after those Confederate monuments came down. There it is. It seemed like reaching for the stars, Barbara Johns. We know that she is now on the 4th grade standards of learning, and we're happy for that, because this is American history that is necessary for all of us to really understand where we are as Americans and what has happened to get us there. So I hope we never forget Barbara Rose Johns and her sacrifice, even at 16 years old. And I'll stop talking and ask if there are any questions. I see something in the chat. Okay. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat. Well, Barbara Johns went on to become a librarian. In 1991, she died of cancer. Prince Edward County still has, decided within the past 15, 20 years to name the area library in her honor. So that's there, and the auditorium at the now Prince Edward County High School is named after Barbara Rose Johns. So her legacy is still going on, and we hope that she'll continue to shine as a bright light to students and anyone who feels like it's time for change to happen. We all have it inside of us, and her life is one example of how that came to fruition. I can't see. Oh, maybe I should stop sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Maybe that'll make it a little bit better. Yeah, but thank you all for joining. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Yes, I was double checking just to make sure we didn't have any.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amy Tillerson Brown, for helping us to celebrate Barbara Rose Johns. And thank you to each and every one of you who joined us tonight for our Sankofa moment. We will be back with you next month in the month of June. Can you believe it? So please save that link and join us again next month.
Thank you.